Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to House of Footy. It's your boy Ray, and tonight I've got Mac with me.
Good evening.
Unfortunately, Gio won't be able to join us, but don't worry, we got you guys covered. On today's podcast, we are going to be going over some hot button topics that are happening across Europe. Before we get into it, don't forget to follow us on our social media, both on X and Instagram. Our handle is at @houseof_footy. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to us. We are on both Spotify and YouTube. And lastly, feel free to get in touch with us via email. We love hearing from you guys, and we want you guys getting involved. Our email is houseoffooty@hotmail.com. So like I mentioned, Mac, Gio is unfortunately not able to join us tonight. He has prior commitments, but someone who does not have any commitments at the moment is none other than Jose Mourinho. One of the, I'm going to go out and say it, House of Footy favorite. Manager, of course, Jose Mourinho, no longer with Roma after 138 matches managing them there. Kind of sudden, I would say. I think just under 3 years since his arrival in Rome. What are your initial reactions there, Mac?
I understand, given how thus far Roma has competed in Serie A through thus far this year. They haven't done fantastic. They're kind of locked just outside the top four race, not really ever close to the title race. Kind of the vibes off of the Conference League win is really kind of worn off, I would say, over the last couple of years, and you don't see much progression in the club. I think so it makes sense on that end, as well as they're bringing in club legend De Rossi to replace them. So even though the fans may look at that as like, okay, you know what, this is kind of a step backwards from the type of manager that we really like, but they're bringing someone that is kind of a club icon and will kind of placate them, where it's an easier transition versus bringing somebody that maybe is not directly as close to Rome and Roma as a club. So I think I understand the change. I'm not surprised it's happened. The more interesting topic for me is is this, and it seems like it's been the trajectory for Jose Mourinho, is the waning of his career. Are we coming towards the twilight of his career? Because you've seen clubs where, not to put disrespect on an individual club, but if you're coaching from the Chelseas, you're coaching at the Manchester United, you're coaching the Real Madrids, and your last two clubs are Tottenham then Roma, that is definitely a step down to a step down, and I'm curious to see what happens next. Overall, I think that is probably the most interesting thing to take away, because even when I look at this Roma squad, do I anticipate them to be competitive even this year for, let's say, the title? Not likely. As well as, do I see many young players or the infrastructure, when they're already on the third highest wage bill in Serie A, to have a large degree of improvement if they were to spend this coming January or, of course, during the offseason? No. So I don't see much wiggle room for improvement. So the manager change makes sense. So the more interesting conversation for me is the Mourinho one. What happens with him going forward?
Exactly. And of course, you just covered it. So I'm not going to touch on sort of like his time there and what sort of led to this decision. But of course, what is on everyone's mind, what's next for Mourinho? And I've noted down, of course, a couple options. He could take a break from managing for the time being. But, you know, we all always want to see what Mourinho's up to, and he could potentially join another league. Now, just what you're mentioning about the level of, I would say, downward trajectory for the clubs that he's managed, Spurs and Roma. No disrespect to them, of course, but you can't really compare them to your Real Madrid, Manchester United, and Chelsea of the old days, where they were really at the peak of their sort of peak of their prowess. Whereas now, of course, these teams are not necessarily doing poorly, but of course not there challenging for Champions Leagues year in, year out. So that led me to really, of course, looking back at what he's won last. And of course, that's the Europa Conference League. Famously, he was the first manager to win that competition, first manager to win all three European competitions. So that really leads me to think maybe that's his level now. Of course, he and a lot of people still think he has what it takes to manage at the top. Of course, a lot of experience. So I wouldn't be surprised if a team that's in the Champions League takes a shot, takes a punt. Maybe their season's kind of winding down. They want to try something new. Go with him. But realistically, maybe you might feel the same as me or not. his level of, I guess, stake around Europe now is basically a European Conference League team, maybe a Europa League team, just because, of course, you have your top managers. You're going to be, of course, your Pep Guardiola, Jurgen Klopp, the managers that are managing at Champions League level. Then you have your up and coming managers. The one I can think of course, Xavi Alonso, coming for the Europa League. And then you just have those experienced managers who know how to get it done, but are maybe past their best days. So that's what I'm seeing. And I think a little bit of what I think some people are thinking. What are your initial thoughts on where his next landing position could be in the world of football?
So I got 4 different options for you. And I think all of them are possible. I think some of them are more degree of unlikely. So let me go with what I think would be the least likely to the most likely. I think the least likely and what all reports are going through is with Saudi Arabia. I don't necessarily, because they have been more of a quieter league in this January transfer window, whereas we've seen in the offseason that they're spending big money. Okay, so if bringing over big players hasn't worked well and hasn't kind of vaulted the league up, what if we bring in the special one? What if we bring in the chosen one? What if we bring in Jose Mourinho? Does that help elevate the league a little bit further and other people's perspectives? Again, the money will be there. I don't personally think Jose Mourinho's ever been really about that. He's been more about straight just winning, and that's been his priority. And any club he's win in the European levels, I don't see that, and that's why I'll go the least likely. Then I think second, in terms of going from bottom to top, would be going and coaching international football. I think that's an interesting option because maybe there's not a big club open right now for him where he can kind of slide into. Maybe a European team, maybe has always been links with him with Portugal. What if Southgate gets the sack before or during Euros, something like that? That could be interesting as even a stopgap until maybe a bigger club that he's actually interested in opens up. I think that is a good kind of leeway. Again, it's too close to the competition. That's why I'll still have it lower, but I think it's a very interesting possibility. But the 2 that I'm looking at as my favorites, one very close to home for us of what we'd be looking at, and one a little bit further away. The easy option I think would be, and they're really tied in for me, would be one, Porto. They've only won 3 of the last 10 domestic leagues, which is very much a drought for them. And he's definitely a god to them. So if they have kind of an inkling that he's interested in coming back, whoever their manager is, I couldn't tell you. I'll be honest with you. He gets free reign to do whatever the hell he wants and what he wants with that team. And there'd be no questions asked. As well as if he brings a little bit more back to success to them, then it goes like the full arc of his career is kind of return where it began. That'd be great. But my personal favorite, still not very likely to happen, but my personal favorite is the Newcastle job. Ooh. If Eddie Howe is sacked and a team that is looking for more European Champions League credentials wants to be able to bring a manager, and if Eddie Howe is sacked, is there a clear manager out there that's better than Jose Mourinho right now that has that type of pedigree? No. And I think his passion, his demeanor would fit well at St. James's Park, and they would definitely buy into him, and he could get the vibe to buy into them. Would his style of football still put him in a position where it maybe is as exciting or garner a whole lot of love on that end, or has it gone past his level? I think that's the fair criticism there. So maybe that's why they don't look at him. But if you go purely based off of ownership ties to what type of the money that they could spend on a manager, giving him Champions League competition, maybe not next season, depending on how things work out for Newcastle the rest of this year, but that's their highlighted goal, and it'll bring a lot more, I guess maybe like a stamp of the Jose Mourinho approval. Of course, that didn't work well for Tottenham, who tried to do something very similar recently with Mourinho himself. But I think that that's not too far of a shout if something does happen with Eddie Howe. So those are the 4 that I think are feasible. What are your thoughts? Do you have a particular favorite one?
I wanted to quickly touch on the international possibility because I thought maybe that's something that you wouldn't have brought up, but I'm glad that you did. I do like the idea, of course, him managing a big international side, but also I wouldn't mind if he takes a little bit of a break and takes before he comes back into like a top managerial role in club football, takes on like a Croatia job or like one of the peripheral European teams that have some star players, but are always sort of struggling with the big boys in Europe. Maybe have a quick stint in international football before he comes back, just because I think he may be due a little bit of a break. So just wanted to mention that. Of course, we do hope to see him manage at a top international nation one day. So we'll have to just wait and see that. But exactly what you touched on with Newcastle, of course, if he comes back to the Prem, that's going to be fantastic for not just all Premier League fans, but of course, House of Footy as well, because, and more so Gio, because just wanted to ask if you know the number of red cards that Roma Roma accumulated during Jose Mourinho's time there in just around 3 years.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. I want whatever the option is. I'm going to go over. That's just I think that's a fair shout. So let's say most teams average what, like 4 a year, so maybe 12. That's my guess.
Okay. Do you think it's more than 20?
No, wait. 20? 16? No. I'm again. That's scary to think about. I'm gonna go no. I hope it's not. For God's sake, I hope it's not.
From what I've seen, his team accumulated 29 red cards during his stint there, and of course, not just players on the pitch, but of course, coaching staff,
That's
players on the bench and stuff. So for Gio, with his prediction for the season to get cards over, if Jose Mourinho comes to manage Newcastle, it's done. That is sealed. Just move on to the next one. We got to grant Gio that. So just wanted to mention that because, of course, that would be very fun. But yeah, no, exactly. I do want to see if he can come back to the Premier League, but I'm just not exactly sure if at this point it will be the best move for him and or Newcastle at this point. So I'm just waiting it out. I'm very excited to see what his next move is. He's of course very, very entertaining overall, and so I'm sure he's not too far away from appearing in some interview, giving us some insight on something that maybe happened during his glory days, or he just comes out, slags a former player of his or a current player in world football, and it just catches the media's attention. But Jose Mourinho, of course, House of Footy favorite. We'll see what he does. Let's then move on to another topic. And again, we're just touching on different topics in Europe. So, Mac, I'm going to throw it to you. Is there a specific one that you want to bring up so that we can discuss?
I think it makes the most sense just to stay in Serie A for a little bit. And the team I want to be able to make sure that we discuss it in a negative sense is Napoli. I'm very curious to see what happens with them over the course of this, let's say, next 6 to 8 months. One of the links for Jose Mourinho of where if Materazzi, Mazzarri, I forgot the Napoli manager's name escapes me as of right now. But if he were to be replaced, given the form, one of the links has been Jose Mourinho to go and coach Napoli, which would be a huge split of how they played previously to Mourinho. So I don't see that happening. That's why I didn't bring it up initially. But the matter of the fact that they're in rumors of replacing a manager that just won the Serie A last year is very interesting to me. And when you look at their player profile on the team that they currently have, I wouldn't be surprised if we take a look, considering how well they've done this year in comparison to last year's. Do they strongly consider more of a reset? The reason being, of course, as we all know, last year they won the Scudetto, finished with 90 points. If you're looking at a kind of scoring expected goal difference in terms of the amount of goals they scored, the amount of goals they conceded, was a positive 33. Thus far this year, it's been positive 13.2. So they're still on track to do well. And if you look at the overall Serie A, that would put them third overall. But in games that have been close, they've missed that fine margin where when they've won, they've generally kind of beaten and smashed teams. But in those close games, they haven't been able to pull through. And it's interesting to see if there are going to be changes to this club. It's the only major change that they've really had from, I would argue, from last year, this year, is Kim going to Bayern Munich. That's probably been their biggest miss. And they haven't had as much turnover. So the knock-on effect that may have had, very interesting. And when you take a look at two players that have been in rumors, more Victor Osimhen, who's 25, and Kvaratskhelia, who's 22. If you're looking at selling both those players, that's £250 million conservatively. And that's a good way as a club to, we won the Scudetto. We're going to be able to reset. We have that money in the bank. Do we build from the bottom up? Because if you look at the rest of the age profile for their club, it's in the late 20s, early 30s, aside from those two players. And the longer you wait on them, I feel like the less money you're going to be able to attract for those players. So given where they are in the standings right now, best case, I think they finish third in Serie A, which is that where you want to finish? And again, Osimhen's away at the Africa Cup of Nations, so you're going to miss out on him and really rely on Kvaratskhelia, it feels like, on their squad right now. So I'm very interested to see what they do. Is there reset? Does it start even in the January transfer window? I think maybe not. I think this is probably one of those two players. If you ask me right now, and if I would think that are both those players in the starting lineup for Napoli next year, I'd go no. I think at least one is gone, maybe both.
That's major talks about both players potentially even leaving last summer, along with Kim, who of course joined Bayern Munich. But yeah, Walter Mazzari has a very, very difficult job. Currently 8th in the Serie A, with Osimhen going to be missing for I think at least several weeks due to AFCON, and then Kvaratskhelia hasn't had the impact, I don't think, for Napoli this year. Last year, of course, lighting it up. Right now, I think he only has 5 goals in Serie A, 3 assists to go along with those. So, of course, overperforming last year. But with that being said, any sort of drop in what's expected of you is going to come big, especially after such a big change in management. I think in that case, it's quick to... would like to quickly mention Spalletti, the previous manager. I think he got out at the right time, because if there was really no intention to rebuild and sort of add on to this team in the summer transfer window, I think they may have only brought in Raspadori in the summer transfer window. And then if him, such a big figure at the back, was leaving, talks about Osimhen and Kvaratskhelia also leaving, doesn't leave you in a good position. The owner, who's notorious for selling off players, as of course he looks at this more so as a business to of course get as much money for your assets as possible. But yeah, it's not looking good. Currently 8th. The performances have dropped significantly in Serie A. Looking as well, they do have a Champions League tie coming up against Barcelona. Even though Barcelona are not great, I don't like the chances for Napoli. This year, they did have a group with Real Madrid. Who else did they have? Union Berlin, and the other team would have been... escapes me at the moment. But yeah, doesn't look like they had such a hot start to the year. Not expecting them to finish it that strong. So yeah, I think we can definitely expect a fire sale. Those 2 big names, of course, going out of this club, and then we'll see what they do if they want to keep this coach, or bringing a up and coming Italian coach, very common in Serie A, and rebuild that way. It could be something in the cards for us. What do you think they should do, though, Mac, just to finish off this part of the podcast?
I think they have to do the fire sale. Just again, we're talking about 2 players where Victor Osimhen has been rumored to going to both Chelsea, Arsenal. Anyone really need kind of a world-class striker. He's been linked there. He's also been linked to Real Madrid, which would probably be my underdog favorite team for him to go to, because I think he could potentially fit in nicely there as being kind of the striker that they need. It's interesting to see what happens with the whole Mbappe situation, but if you weren't to come over to the Premier League, I think he could be a fit there. Because a lot of squads, it feels like right now, are in dire need of a number 9, and he's probably the guy for it. He's just about to enter the prime of his career, being 25, so you got a good another 4 or 5 years out of him, potentially being a world-class player. The Kvaratskhelia piece, I think, is a little bit more interesting, where he's a little bit younger. Was it more of a one-season wonder last year, and this year is kind of what we may expect of him going forward? That might be a harder kind of player to move off of and still get big bucks. I think you can. And the question for me more so is what you're looking across a lot of the cash positive, I would say a lot of richer clubs, whom they may be targeting, what type of player they may be targeting. I think, again, it might be interesting if it happens with the Mbappe situation, is if Kvaratskhelia is the one that were to go over to PSG. I think that could be a nice fit where it's more of a, okay, we're not going to go to one of the biggest clubs in the world because maybe we don't want to shell out that cash, but kind of replace maybe that wage bill, have a lot of money come in there where PSG are still able to kind of sell off tickets of a up and coming player in a lot of ways and still potentially move off them similarly in a couple of years and rake in a lot of cash, and goes into kind of what their philosophy has been since exiting from the Messi and Neymar positions and signing younger players. This could be with their star younger player to fit in if Mbappe were to leave. So I think the fire sale has to happen. There has to be a reset because especially in that midfield, when you look at Anguissa, Zielinski, they're 28, 29, and they're probably arguably they're two better players in those spots where you haven't seen, similar to, I guess, your experience with Liverpool, that reset there where we're going to bring in a couple of players to kind of get ahead of it in different positions. And then this offseason, we're going to focus on this midfield. It's kind of been more status quo, in my opinion. So again, I think there has to be a fire sale. You're going to get a lot of money, and I think if you're getting, let's argue if it's £250 million, that's 5-6 quality young players you can sign with that money. 3 of them go right. You're in a good spot if you're Napoli within a couple of years again to be able to do that reset. So again, I think that has to be the way forward, especially because in this season, they're too far off to be able to really get in the title race. The best position, I think, is 4th that they can finish because you're looking at both Milan clubs as well as Juventus in the top 3 for certain, right? As of right now, of course.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. It's going to be a tough end to the season for them. I do expect both players to finish the season with Napoli, hopefully helping them achieve as high as possible finish in the Serie A. But yeah, I completely agree with sort of the destinations for both these players. Osman, of course, looks like he's destined to be one of the top strikers in the world for the coming few years. And it looks like it probably will be outside of Serie A. Could be La Liga or elsewhere. With Kvaratskhelia, I do think in any other season, I can see a Bayern Munich type of move where Juventus approach him in January, tell him, hey, we're going to come for you. Big coverage in the media. You know, everyone knows he's going to go to Juve because, of course, Juve have been previously had been dominating Serie A, and then he just joins them and kicks off his career there. Currently, I don't think that will happen with any Serie A clubs, just considering the type of sort of what's the trend has been happening. Not exactly. I don't think anyone's got the ability to sign him at this moment, especially because of his pedigree in Serie A, and I don't think De Laurentiis would want him to go to a competitor to sort of come back and haunt him in the future. So we'll see what happens with him there. But yeah, very, very interesting. We'll definitely keep an eye out on these in the Serie A now with the departure of Jose Mourinho, but also on how Napoli get on for the rest of the season. But let's take a quick break here, Mac, and then we'll be back covering some more European talk. So stay with us, guys. Welcome back to House of Footy, guys. We are going to continue our podcast now, just touching on a different topic in the world of football in Europe at the moment. Mac, let me toss it to you. Is there something that interests you that you want to bring up so that we can discuss at this point?
So I don't mean to be able to kind of rain on anybody's parade. I know there's a lot of love going around for this team, this club, their manager. And I know I definitely have a propensity to, I guess I would say, underrate their manager. I think that's something that you might say. But with Bayer Leverkusen, I don't think they're cooked. Let me explain. So I think it's been a fun story. And I don't think it's too different than the Girona story, the Union Berlin story last year in the Bundesliga, where I think this is definitely a higher quality team than either of those. But I put them in the same position where, are they going to win the Bundesliga? No. I think as of right now, they've done very, very well. They're the only, I think, top 5 European team to not have a loss thus far this season. So they're still technically invincible. But I think their margin of errors in a lot of their games have been so small. And if you're looking kind of just at the base numbers between them and, let's say, the direct competition that wins it every year in the Bundesliga, the Bayern Munich, in terms of their expected goals, in terms of their difference between goals for versus goals against, their expected goals difference is at 19.7, where Bayern Munich's at 34.2. So you're talking about the amount of goals that will score versus goals that they'll concede, where the margin is so much bigger for Bayern Munich. And they're currently second in the Bundesliga. Whereas if you look at the third place team, Stuttgart, it's identical to what Bayer Leverkusen are currently at. So that's more in the range of where their expected goals have happened thus far this year. They should be, but they've just been fortunate in some performances. I think the other key feature that is reason why that they might get knocked down is their injury to their star striker. A lot of the plaudits have gone to Florian Wirtz, but Victor Boniface, was supposed to go play in the Africa Cup of Nations. First game, got hurt. So now it's not even just going to be about 3 weeks. Xabi Alonso said, and he's not supposed to come back until April now. So you're talking about their striker, who's been playing well thus far this season. I think he has, 10 goals, if I remember correctly? I think 10 goals, 7 assists. So he's leading the club. And their backup options are both Czech Republic strikers, either Patrick Schick, who a couple years ago seemed to be an up-and-coming striker, but thus far only has 3 goals. It's very hit and missed. Or Adam Holzek, who has 1 goal, a little bit of younger player, 21, so maybe he's not ready for the limelight at this moment. So arguably their second best offensive player out until April. They're going through a tough stretch in their season, and Bayern Munich are only getting better and better and better. So do I think they'll have a great season? Yes. Do I think in all likelihood they'll finish in the top 3, get a Champions League spot, which is phenomenal? Yes. But are they going to win the league? No. And it is what it is. It's just unfortunate. I hope it happens. I think it'll be fun. I think what Xabi Alonso's done for the club, he arrived in October 2022. Last season wasn't the greatest. Has really improved the team since then. Again, being a little bit selfish there, seeing Granit Xhaka, he's the second leader in minutes on the team. Love to see something, third in minutes on the team. So love to see all of that. But again, we're living a little bit of Neverland. We're living in a little bit of fairyland. It's not how it is, but it's fun while it lasts.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree in the sense that it's Bayern's league essentially to lose. Do have to credit, of course, Leverkusen with how well they've done so far. 14 wins, 3 ties, 0 losses. That's no matter which way you sort of look at it, that's very, very impressive, especially this late into the season. I know it's January, so you could say it's kind of halfway through the season, but you got to give it up to them. The way they're playing as well, it's catching a lot of people's attention. But the way that they are playing, it's very free-flowing, sort of too idealistic, whereas we know, and we've been hurt before, maybe respectively with the clubs that we support, it all might look pretty and all when you're free flowing and scoring, but when times are tough, your striker goes gets injured, you deal with a couple of your star players putting poor performances coupled week after week. Things start to look grim, and so that's when Bayern really strike again. And very much, I would say, like Manchester City for the Premier League, it's kind of that monster that is just may stutter because, of course, they may have focus on other competitions throughout the season, but they're coming back. And hey, maybe Eric Dyer is the solution for Bayern Munich to finally go over the top and regain that first place spot in the Bundesliga. Also, meanwhile, keeping their eyes set on the Champions League trophy with Harry Kane, of course, trying to win it all in his first season in Bayern Munich. But yeah, I do agree with you. I think it's a little bit too good to be true. And I'm just hoping that it could last a little longer. And their players don't have a serious downturn in form collectively, because that's, of course, going to come back and really be very much like Dortmund last year. They had it in their hands, but it just sucks when you're so close and it just falls apart in the last moment. But I did want to touch a little bit, unless you want to continue discussing Leverkusen or any other clubs in the Bundesliga. I did want to mention Bayern Munich, but go ahead.
I just want to finish up on Leverkusen before we move past them. Is that similar to Napoli? Again, I know maybe this is a kind of an English league perspective, but their outgoings, I think, are fascinating. When you're looking at some of the young players like Jeremy Frimpong, even Florian Wirtz, even Victor Boniface, what do they do? They're all young, up-and-coming players. The age profile a little bit different for this Napoli team, where you're looking at a lot of their players are in their early to mid-20s. But I think you may be in a position to cash out and get great sales on some of these players. Particularly with Florian Wirtz, would I be surprised if he's not going for a 70 million pounds to an English team this coming summer? No, I would not be surprised at all. That would not shock me at all. If I see Frimpong going for 50 million to a big team out there that's in need of a fullback, I would not be surprised at all. I think that these players are very, very quality. You can see that they can play in a very intensive, high demanding system, which you're going to see transition over to those bigger clubs with maybe more expectations, but it shouldn't be too difficult where the play style is so dramatic of a difference that you don't see them comfortably fit in and excel even. So again, I think that's another fascinating piece of the puzzle for them, is where this is very maybe a one season wonder where, yeah, you'll finish second. Fantastic. One of the best seasons they've had in quite some time. And then you reset from there.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I do expect at least a couple outgoings with how well they've been playing Leverkusen and those players getting stock in European football. So wouldn't be surprised if at least a couple of them make their ways to other teams, maybe either other leagues in Europe, but something to keep an eye out. Another potential transfer out, this time Bayern Munich related, and this one will be maybe something more for us to tinker about, think of possibilities. And that's, of course, reports saying Matthias de Ligt is having problems with Thomas Tuchel in the Bayern camp. And we talked about this player a lot when he came through at Ajax. We expected him to easily become one of the best defenders in the world for the next decade. Many could argue it hasn't gone that way for him. 24 years old, currently turning 25 next year, this coming year. Could be leaving Bayern Munich, and it would be, now he would have been applying his trade in 3 different leagues. If you look at it from the right angle, you can still see him joining a top club in the world and then cementing himself for the rest of his sort of prime years as one of the best defenders in the world. But it's kind of tough because time is running out. He hasn't had, I think, the best time at Bayern since joining from Juventus, and so it's a delicate situation. Which, Mac, I'll have to toss it to you. What do you think is the move for de Ligt here, and Bayern? Should they offload him in the off season?
It's tough. I like him as a player, but of course, the most important thing for a player is the relationship with the manager. If they're not getting the trust, not getting the kind of the buy-in, I understand Eric Dyer was brought in to be more of a holding defensive midfielder presence potentially, which I think is very funny, but it doesn't necessarily do well in all likelihood that you may see him play center half ahead of de Ligt. Again, I am going to kind of make this transparent with you. I think the easy shout for me is Liverpool. I think that's a natural fit there as kind of the Matip replacement where, okay, if he's the understudy beside Van Dijk, who he plays the international team with, could he be ahead of Konate depending on the situation there, going to a bigger club, maybe a little bit of lower expectations in that way, where I think a lot of the other teams that are in need of a center half, if you're taking a look at, let's say, like Chelsea or Manchester United, you might be in a position where too much pressure is put on him, where it might not be as comfortable of a transition. So I think a team like Liverpool may be able to get in for under a certain amount of money. I don't think this is their biggest area to address in terms of concern. We've talked about like a defensive midfielder or a left full back. But if you would ask me aside from that, another center half never hurts, especially with aging Matip and Konate sometimes looks really good, sometimes doesn't. So maybe have an alternative option beside Van Dijk, or even worst case, if Van Dijk is injured again, I think a Konate de Ligt duo could work very well. So that for me is the easiest fit if he was going to move off of Bayern Munich, of course.
That's a fantastic shout. Of course, you're mentioning Liverpool, so anytime that comes up, I have to agree. No, but exactly that. The situation really needs to be the best for him, not maybe the biggest team, but the best situation where he's not thrust into stopping essentially being the main defender, and really everything is thrust upon him, where he can come into that team if it is at Liverpool, make a couple of appearances, see how things bode, and then from there, slowly blend him, bet him in, and then eventually he does take over. Matip is going to be out for the season. His contract is ending, so could be the last time we've seen him in a Liverpool shirt. Konate has injury problems. Van Dijk is not getting any younger, so definitely something to look for in the future. One alternative, Mac, you might not like, and it might be our next topic of conversation, could be La Liga. Not necessarily as a permanent transfer at the moment, but Real Madrid have had a lot of defensive issues throughout the season, of course, with Militao and I believe Alaba, both suffering season-ending injuries at the center defense, leaving really Antonio Rudiger being the main guy in that back two, which if you looked at it in a couple seasons ago when he was playing at Chelsea, you would have thought that would be a crazy situation to be in. So maybe he does make a move there temporarily or come the off season. That's something we'll have to see. But yeah, that's something really interesting for us to really take a look at, because his career could go either way, I think, in this next move. But yeah.
Absolutely. I think it definitely could go either way. He definitely has, you can see him 3 years down the road being one of the best center halves in the world, or is he just kind of a regular footballer at the end of the day where he's just a good center half, right? But enough of, I know you've catered a lot to me in terms of things that I'm interested in terms of the world of football right now. But outside of England, what other, I guess you hinted at it earlier, what other story or what other area of intrigue you want to be able to talk about today?
So, of course, we're going to have to go to La Liga, and I don't think I'm going to focus too much on Girona, even though it's a fantastic story, very much like the Bayer Leverkusen story. Real Madrid, I just want to quickly touch on them because it's a weird, very, very weird season for them. A lot of injuries, no world-class striker. Jude Bellingham's first season, I would definitely say overperforming, but with his quality, it looks like it might just be what we come to expect of him season after season. Ancelotti's been there for a couple seasons now, and signed an extension that was supposed to end, I think, this year until June 2026. So they do have a quote-unquote midterm solution, like not necessarily long-term, not short-term, but they do have some, I guess, structure in place. But on the flip side, Real Madrid, even though they have a lot of questions about them, 21 games unbeaten in all competitions. Last loss was in September. So really you can't argue that there needs to be a big change. So I just wanted to quickly mention, I do expect them to eventually come and win the Liga. But it's weird because at the same time, I don't think a lot of fans in the world, apart from Real Madrid fans, are expecting them to win. They wouldn't be surprised if they don't win the Liga or the Champions League, which of course they're both competitions that they really value highly themselves. But just wanted to ask your opinion on what's happening with, I guess, La Liga and with Real Madrid so far this season. Is there something that is sort of clicking for them that sort of is pushing them over the top? What do you think, Mac?
It has to be the defensive structure that they played with thus far this year. With only 11 goals against, that's been kind of the main driving force. They're not kind of a high scoring goal threat where they're kind of romping teams 4 or 5-0, as we may have seen in previous decades under Real Madrid in La Liga. So I think that's been the major difference. And you're talking about players like Danny Carvajal, Rudiger, Alaba when he's played, players like that, even Mendy. Those players, I think that if you ask me 5 years from now, even 3 years from now, they're going to be part of Real Madrid. No, probably not. But they're the players that kind of been leading the charge. And if your goalkeeper is Kepa and you're doing that, there has to be something right there. I think a lot of the credit has to go to both Toni Kroos and Luka Modric in midfield as well. In terms of, it's always nice as a luxury is where you get that 1-goal lead from a Jude Bellingham. You're able to not start those players. We bring them on substitution. It's like, hey, go on the pitch, control the rest of the game, do what you need to do. You know how to be able to kill it. So I think that's been their success. I think we are in a transitional period for the team. You have a lot of the hype has been around their young midfield players, and I think that's accurate and fair to say. Even this year, I would say Rodrigo's played well, but Vinicius Jr., aside from his most recent hat-trick, has he had a great season? No. I think he's only 4 goals in the league. Not the greatest return of what you would expect from a player like him in all likelihood. So I think that there is a lot of areas of concern potentially defensively as they transition, but this is a team that you wouldn't be surprised if now they have their big summer, because it seems like they've been saving their powder for a couple seasons now, where they do go get Mbappe. They have their, I think it was 08 where they went and got Kaká, Benzema, something like that. It was all within one transfer window, something like that. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens this year. And even what I highlighted about earlier, one under the radar one that I'll be very excited about is if they were the team to get Jeremy Frimpong and as the replacement for Carvajal on the right side of defense. I think that'll be a lot of fun. I think that'll be very fascinating. Alongside Mbappe, and then maybe you bring in a center half, and now you're talking about another Galacticos era, right? I don't think they're there yet. I think if you look at the echelons in terms of tiers of teams in world football, they're not in that top tier. I think there is, I would argue, Man City and almost everybody else. But they're in the second tier. But for them to enter that first tier, they need one more big splashy window, which I wouldn't be surprised if it's just about to happen. But in terms of the league holistically, I know I'm going on there. I apologize. I think that you're absolutely right, Girona. It's more of a sinking ship than what Bayer Leverkusen are going to have. To be honest, Real Madrid have a game in hand. They win that, they'll be back in first place. I think the only other fascinating conversation is really with what's happening with Barcelona, because with them, there's been talks about Xavi being replaced. I'd be surprised. Their difference from last year to this year has been kind of interesting, because the positive you would give them last year is the positive you'll give Real Madrid this year. Their defense. I think they only conceded like 15 goals all of last season in La Liga, if I remember correctly. So that's a phenomenal defensive rate. And Real Madrid have really kind of complemented that and matched that this year. So I think it'll be interesting to see what they do, because they're a team that, as we all know, are in dire need of cash. So I wouldn't be surprised if now we finally see their curtain close for players like De Jong. Does he make the move away? Players like that, where they have to do more of a reset. So I think we're in a transitional year for La Liga as a whole. But I think in Real Madrid, I think they're most primed to take advantage of that, win the domestic league, keep people off their back a little bit, and heaps pressure on everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. Great point there. I think if Real Madrid get it right, it could be them dominating La Liga for the next 5 years, conservatively, maybe 10 years, depending, of course, how things go. But it at this point, from where we're sitting, it looks like they'd have to get it very, very wrong for them not to do so. And so lastly, of course, to close, maybe a quick answer, maybe a long answer. We'll try to keep it quick. This has to be the year that Mbappe comes to Madrid, right, Matt? Because there's no other. I only see 2 options for Mbappe. It's Real Madrid or sign a contract extension, double down on PSG, because I don't really see him going anywhere else. Of course, he's now entering his last 6 months of his PSG deal, and he's now free to negotiate with clubs for a contract. And there's been some Premier League clubs throwing their hats in the ring, but I think it might just be another. Maybe Mbappe's paying, his camp is paying these media outlets to fabricate stories about there's more teams out there for you. Madrid, you gotta act quick, but realistically, I don't really see other options than him going to Real Madrid or staying with PSG. So, just quickly before we wrap up, Mac, what are your thoughts on that situation?
So as of right now, if you were to ask me, I don't like the fit with Real Madrid. I think him and Vinicius are too similar. They won't play well together. I don't like that fit. It doesn't seem natural. It seems like Vinicius, at least the feeling that I get, where he sees himself as one of the offensive guys, the main hub of the future. And I think Mbappe would come in there, immediately supplant him. And in all likelihood, you would have to see Vinicius either adapt to a different role, which he may not want, or we may see a similar situation with Neymar and the Messi situation, where he's going to feel like the shadow, he's going to leave. And maybe if you're a Real Madrid fan, you're a little bit more tied to that player. Might not like that. if you're asking me, I think 85% chance he goes into Real Madrid. If you ask me, 10% chance he stays. The one I'm most fascinated in, and again, I'm going to pick on your favorite club. I love the Liverpool rumor. It's my favorite one because it's simple math where you look at it where Mohamed Salah goes to Saudi Arabia for, let's say, 150 million. That's what was reported last offseason. And what you're able to do is you sign him on a free, inflate his wages because now you have such an influx of cash. You have him come in and now he's your main guy. And now you're in the conversation where we're talking about, similar to Liga had the Ronaldo Messi conversation. Now we're having Mbappe versus Haaland, Liverpool versus Man City. They're the premier teams, not just in England, but in the world once again. And those are what everyone's looking at. I love that rumor selfishly because it would be the most entertaining thing for us. Of course, that would take Arsenal have no shot, so maybe not selfishly it doesn't do well for me. I think just in terms of our podcast, in terms of kind of the world of football, I think that would be the most fascinating look. And I think that would be the most intriguing one. But again, I think that's very, very unlikely, but a fun thought experiment of what I would like to see happen. But yeah, and unlikely, if you ask me, guns on my head, what he's going to do, he's going to go to Madrid. That's what players like him do.
Fresh out. And so with that being said, we're going to conclude our podcast for today. Of course, a lot of things to look out for, and we'll definitely keep an eye out for that. But if you guys like what you heard, please like and subscribe to us on our social medias. That's at @house_of_footy. If you have any comments, suggestions, or general banter, get in touch with us via email as well, housefooty@hotmail.com. Next time you hear from us will be next week when we review the rest of match week 21 from the Premier League. But until then, Mac, thank you for joining us tonight.
Peace out.
See you guys soon.